Hello my beautiful friends and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is for you if you are somebody who finds themselves often wanting to believe the worst. Now this can look like counting yourself out of opportunities because you're self-rejecting in advance. It can look like self-deprecating as you walk into the room or as somebody presents some kind of opinion of you that has some level of regard in it. It can look like lowering both other people's and your own expectations of yourself. Despite the fact that you have this track record of being a person who is highly competent and highly capable. And perhaps that's why these people seem to have these high expectations of and high regard for you. And yet, despite all that optimism from the external perspective, you can't seem to get on board with that level of optimism, and instead you keep finding your mind takes you to wanting to believe the worst and think about the worst. Let me help you understand why your brain does this so that you can break this cycle. Now immediately, in the immediate term, you might not feel like there's a problem here. You might find your self-deprecation and your self-rejection humbling and charming in that way. You might think of it as a virtuous trait. But I want you to ask why you don't treat your loved ones with the same level of self-deprecation, disrespect, and underestimating. You actually know that these behaviors, this pessimism towards a person's capabilities and self-value aren't actually helpful in life. And instead, I want you to see, and this is one of the core parts of the transformation I want to create for my members in Dear Darling, I want you to see how this kind of thinking keeps your life small. It makes you feel smart and it makes you feel safe in the short term, in the immediate situation, but it keeps your life small. And I just want to make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to decide on purpose how you want to treat yourself, and therefore what opportunities you want to give to yourself in life. So let's talk about it. So to understand what seems paradoxical in terms of how we would want to treat ourselves, this kind of self-deprecation and self-respect, this thinking the worst about ourselves and thinking the worst about what's possible for us and what's available to us in the world, I've developed this concept of the sure scale. So this is a scale from 1 to 5 in terms of how sure your thinking and therefore your feeling is when it comes to our brain choosing what it wants to think, subconsciously of course. Because recognizing the quality of our thoughts in this way, this dimension of how our thoughts feel in terms of a lack of certainty and control as a 0 on the sure scale to a 5 out of 5 level of certainty and control on the sure scale. Recognizing how just this dimension of our thoughts makes us feel differently helps us understand why we might choose to think negative thoughts. Because as you sit and ask yourself the question, why would I be thinking about the worst case scenario? And this sure scale that I've developed is something that I've created to help explain to my clients that we don't just think thoughts because they're true. That's not how our mind decides which thoughts to offer us. And this is a really foreign concept because the default operation of our mind is that our mind produces a thought and we assume by default that that thought is true. Our brain doesn't select which thoughts to think or which thoughts to believe based on what is true or even based on what is smart, but actually first subconsciously based on how those thoughts feel. We are always, as humans, wanting to feel better. And one of the things that makes us as humans feel terrible is uncertainty and a lack of control. Thoughts that make you feel uncertain and like you don't have control as a human. And thoughts that make us feel relatively better are more certain thoughts that give us the ultimately illusion of having control. And with that, we can be motivated to think thoughts that are not only not true, but that limit our opportunities in life. You know, like a thought like, oh, that's not possible. When you're thinking about a dream or an amazing goal that you have, or maybe that it's possible that you have some positive trait about yourself in the instance of a compliment. In so many cases, instead of sitting in the uncertainty of, oh, I wonder if that's true. I don't know if that's true. It's possible that it's true. I don't know. We would rather move ourselves up the sure scale to a thought like, no, that's not possible for me. Not because it's a positive, happy thought or a thought that creates amazing opportunities, but because it feels sure. It feels certain. It gets rid of the uncertainty and even some aspects of the lack of control, because when we feel like we understand the world, we feel more control. We think that therefore we know what's going to happen tomorrow, this year, in the next moment, when we believe we understand the world and we have certainty. So simply understanding this dimension of thoughts, this quality of our thoughts, our perception of the world that we can consider, and how important it is for humans, for our sense of safety, for our sense of certainty and control in our human lives, which are ultimately fragile, mortal, and uncertain. Just understanding this desire for and drive towards feeling that certainty and sense of control can help us understand why our mind might produce thoughts that aren't truly useful for us and aren't truly moving us towards our goals. Why does our brain choose to feel fear and anxiety so much of the time? Why does it reach for that? Well, because that moves us up on this sure scale. If we take down here as a 0, feeling powerless, feeling overwhelmed, because we're thinking things like, everything is uncertain, and with that I have no control and I don't know where to look, I'm overwhelmed. Whereas notice how anxiety and fear can feel a little bit better than powerlessness. Whether it's because the anxiety or the fear has us start to fixate on and form an image of the future of what's possible, as opposed to going from, I don't know, everything's up in the air, everything's uncertain, and nothing's in my control. The anxiety and the fear can start to focus us and start to form some kind of tangible image of the future for us. And mistakenly, the thinking worry, the doing something in the worrying about this future can mistakenly feel productive to us. It can feel like we're doing something. Contrast that with not feeling stressed or anxious in the situation. Well, most people would feel even worse sitting back and thinking that they're, quote, doing nothing. They feel better about thinking more about what might go wrong because they believe that that thinking is doing something and somehow preparing them, which is sometimes the case, but on balance, it's more often just an illusion of control. So I just want you to consider in your life if the reason that you're indulging in so much anxiety and fear is actually because it's making you feel a bit better than being low on this sure scale, feeling that powerlessness and that overwhelm. Your fear and anxiety, your stress, doctors will often try and justify to me how their stress is so useful, but actually it just feels better than what you're trying to avoid, which is that awful, terrible, powerless or overwhelmed emotional state. Now, notice how a further step up on the sure scale is deciding that you know what's going to happen, right? Moving from fear and anxiety to certainty, right? And as much as you might resist that outcome, as much as you might not want it to be true, that worst thing is true about you or about the situation. When your mind takes you to that place of, this is true, this is what's real, this is going to happen, this is for sure. I'm not a good doctor, I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna make a mistake, this isn't gonna work, this is impossible. As negative as those thoughts are, and as much as they're associated with other negative emotions, on the sure scale, they move you from anxiety and fear to certainty. And even with the resistance to those negative outcomes, there comes this sense of calmness with the certainty about the future and the sense of control that gives you. working with a surgeon, we were looking into why she seems to have this habit of walking into the operating theatre and lowering everybody's expectations of her. She's greeted with excitement and joy to see her by her team, because that's the kind of surgeon she is. And they're talking about how hard the case is and about how she's going to do well. There was some kind of invitation to talk about how the case was going to be difficult and about how they were glad she was here. And her automatic reaction, this was a pattern she said for herself, was to lower everybody's expectations. And I called this the humility shield, because where she didn't feel certain that she could meet their expectations in that operation, she didn't feel certain that she was truly a good surgeon, a great surgeon. That question and that expectation created some uncertainty and anxiety for her. It created this opportunity for her to not meet those expectations. And as positive as those thoughts were, that her team believed in her and she was seen as a good surgeon, the uncertainty that created in her was uncomfortable. And so she moved herself up the sure scale into they're wrong about me. And from that place, she lowered everybody's expectations so that she didn't feel like she had anywhere to fall. She could feel certain that she could meet the expectations that she set for other people about her being a very average surgeon. It can feel better to feel certain about what's true than to sit in the possibility of something good. I just posted a video on Instagram about this in sort of bigger, broader terms in life. Follow me on Instagram if you're not already, Dr. Becc, spell out DOCTOR_Becc, BECC. That's where I put up most of my videos and where most people message me. So I put out this video talking about how I get rewarded in my life for sitting in what's possible, sitting even in a place where other people think that's not possible, right? They move themselves up the sure scale and think the thought, that's not possible. It gives them this sense of certainty, right? You get to feel smart, you get to feel sure, you get to feel comfortable in that decision that this isn't possible. End of story, book closed. I don't have to sit and wondering anymore. But the cost of that is, of course, that they shut themselves out of opportunities. I am willing to sit lower on the sure scale. I'm willing to sit in possibility. And with that, I'm willing to be wrong. Right? I'm willing to make mistakes. I'm willing to fall on my face. I'm willing to, quote, look stupid. I'm willing to have to revise myself and change my beliefs and change my plans and change my thoughts. I'm willing to do all of that for the exchange of being able to create something incredible, right? Something that other people don't think is possible. Something that incites that level of anxiety that makes people think, oh, maybe we can't do that. Maybe that's not going to work out. By resisting elevating myself into that place of certainty and by instead being willing to sit in uncertainty, I open my life up to more possibilities and recognizing that a part of what makes me want to say that something's not possible, say that something's not realistic or reasonable is just because it makes me feel safe, right? On a more superficial level, it makes me feel smart and reasonable and realistic, but all of that just means the same thing. It just means safe. It just means I'm not risking somebody thinking that I'm not smart or not reasonable or not realistic. I don't care about that stuff, I realized, and the feeling of safety that that gives me as much as I care about living my life in the most expansive, explorative, and highly impactful, highly contributing way. And this is my invitation for you to sit back and decide for yourself. What would you rather? What is your pick? Recognizing that a lot of the time we can ourselves out of opportunities and we put on our humility shield and we lower everybody's expectations, we lower our expectations of ourselves and we self-reject in advance because we'd rather feel sure than feel uncertain. And I just want to emphasize with this concept of the sure scale, this is just about how you feel. Just because you think you're sure, just because you feel that you're sure, that doesn't actually mean that it's sure. Our brain is selecting these thoughts based on how they make us feel, not based on what is true. Now, all this talk about uncertainty, anxiety, fear, and the sure scale has come from our current work in Dear Darling in the Stable in Uncertainty course. Our next immersive that we're doing about how to be stable in uncertainty, which is particularly important, as you guys know, for doctors, because clinical medicine is and always will be full of uncertainty and adversity. It's one of the things that makes clinical medicine so challenging, not necessarily just because it's intellectually challenging and building the knowledge and the skills is difficult, but actually because there is always so much uncertainty that we're simultaneously working with. So this is an incredibly important concept for doctors, and I'm so happy to be able to be delivering this course with all these tools that are going to help my doctors, our members in Dear Darling, be stable in uncertainty. If you want this in your life too, then come and join us. The link is down below for Dear Darling. It is by application only because, guys, this group is so beautiful and so brilliant, and we are both a strong place to rise and also a soft place to fall for each other. So it's very important to me that this group is filled with people with the right attitude and the right headspace to kind of hold that greenhouse space to do this really important vulnerable work together in a way where everybody is only adding and strengthening each other in the process by being present, by the coaching topics they bring, and by the way that they relate to other people in the group. So very precious space, very important and impactful space to me that I'm incredibly proud of. So I'd love to read your application to join us. All right, my beautiful friends, any questions down below, and I'll see you in my next one.